Welcome to the Interlocutor with me, Anthony Anaxagorou. Today I'll be joined by Alya Mooro. Alya is a London-raised and Egyptian-born journalist, blogger and model. She holds a master's in journalism and blogs regularly at Mozilla.com. Morizla. She's since had articles looking at music, feminism, fashion and general social commentary featured in ID, Grazia, The Debrief and The Telegraph. She was recently signed to Nev's modelling agency. Alya, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not bad at all. A bit cold, but such is life. I want to start off with the first question. Now, someone who clearly occupies a wide range of job titles, from journalism to social commentary to fashion and modelling, how would you define what you do?
It is a tricky one. I usually just say that I'm a freelance journalist, I've got a blog, and I've only very recently got signed, so I'm going to have to figure out how to kind of get that one in there. But as a wordsmith or like as a journalist, I kind of use that ability and sort of way of seeing the world, I guess, to kind of tap into all the different things that I'm interested in. I think as human beings, we're all kind of, very multifaceted, and we can and are interested in all sorts of different things. And I think often this generation's kind of called generation slashers, because we so often do that, and I think that a lot of that is due to kind of social media and sort of being able to leverage create and kind of leverage a personal brand that under that we can do whatever we want, really.
What are your thoughts on millennials and the generation who have been called the new millennials?
Well, I think what do you mean exactly?
Like, how do you kind of see the way in which they use social media, the way in which a lot of people have argued now that it's become a lot more narcissistic, how social media has kind of created this sense of validation, of constantly needing people to see what we're doing. And this is something that is very characteristic of new millennials.
Yeah, I think that, obviously we are all we're all very addicted to social media, myself included. I tried once to quit, to just kind of take a break from it, and I couldn't even last 24 hours. Wow. Which was really weird. I remember feeling very lonely and sort of feeling like, where is everyone? And no one was, we don't really call each other anymore. Like, we don't even really text really that much anymore. We kind of just assume that we're going to be able to see everything just from our social media profiles. And I wrote an article about that recently for The Debrief, called like "My Friends Don't Ask About Me Anymore" because they think that they see everything on social media. And that was kind of just tapping into the fact that, yeah, cool, I can post 3 times a day on Instagram, and I often do, but it's not really about what's really, really going on. Like, if I'm really upset that day, you can bet that I'm not really going to mention it, just because I guess that's not really what it's meant for. So when you see your friend and they kind of think like, oh yeah, I know everything, and they almost don't ask you like, how are you, or what's really been going on. They kind of just think that what they see is everything. It is a little bit like, throws you a bit, I think. And I think that we're gonna have to figure out how best to kind of make social media work for us, as opposed to us essentially working for social media. We're all complete addicts at the moment, I think.
So is it ruining human relations, the idea that we constantly have to have something that is false, something that is veneered? It's not the true depiction of our lives. It's something that is very, I guess, taken, stylized, airbrushed, filtered, and then put up there to try and give the impression that we live a particular kind of lifestyle.
I think it's difficult to say that it's ruining relationships, because at the same time it does sort of facilitate, like, for example, me and you, like, I used to come to your shows like 4 or 5 years ago, and had it not been for social media, we would probably not have kept in touch, and I probably wouldn't be sitting here on your couch right now. You know what I mean? Or I met one of my best friends on Instagram, and I'm bridesmaid at her wedding this year. And literally, I saw her on Instagram, loved her. She's a jewelry designer. I loved what she was doing. We started following each other. It's been 2 years. Now we've been on loads of holidays together. Like, she's my best friend. I met her on Instagram, So I think that, in terms of personal relationships, it's not as black and white as that. And in terms of professional relationships, it's changes everything. Like, I don't think I would be able to do what I'm doing now were it not for social media.
How's it helped you?
Well, so many ways. Like I'm freelance, so a lot of my connections with editors and stuff I kind of keep up or even started on social media. I got an internship at Grazia, which I think has kind of really allowed me to broaden my horizons and kind of ended up and sorry, and it's got me to where I am now, and that was through meeting the editor and then following up on social media, following her on Twitter, kind of, you know, sending my CV, and she was like, oh, we have actually got an internship starting next week. And, you know, that was how it was, all thanks to Twitter. And I think that especially with, you know, the modeling as well, like I got in touch with a lot of photographers on social media, and I'm a big believer in kind of the more you do, the more you can do. And I think a lot of the time you kind of need to make quite clear to people what it is that you're doing. And I think social media helps, you know, like if you're like, oh, this is the kind of stuff I'm interested in. If someone is looking for some, you know, I read something recently and it was like personal branding is a fancy way of saying, here's how I will make you remember me when you're looking for someone to do the job. Right. And I really like that. And it made me realize like, yeah, well, that is essentially what it is. And social media is the most easy way of branding yourself, I guess,
and connecting with people from like you say, all across the world. It's a really quick and easy way. I guess I'm a bit conflicted because I completely agree with you. I think that it has brought a lot of people together, and it's obviously, there's always been ways that humans have been engineering that we can communicate with each other. So this is obviously the product of the time. However, I have to, you know, talk about, and we have to acknowledge the anxiety that it creates, the idea that we're never really present, because like you say, we're obsessed with this world that is actually completely invisible. It lives on a screen, it lives within us, and it's not a representation of the outside world. And that's what I kind of find quite tragic, particularly with young people now that are growing up and all they've ever known is Facebook and Instagram, and that, you know, to try and build and nurture relationships, cultivate them, is going to be a very challenging thing.
I'm definitely very glad that I'm not, you know, still like 12 or whatever, trying to figure out who I am while on Instagram.
I mean, I know there's 7-8-year-olds now that have smartphones and they have Facebook accounts. Obviously, like the legal age is, what's the legal age for Facebook? 18 or
I think
something like this. But yeah, they all still find ways around it. Now, I've read quite a few of your pieces on moorisla.com. There it is. And I really like the social commentary. I think that you've picked some really interesting thought pieces and kind of followed through, and they're very articulate and they're very well informed and they're well argued, and I really enjoy them.
Thank you.
How would you define the difference between, because in my mind, the modelling and the fashion and the social commentary and the journalism are very disparate. They're not as related as what people might assume. So what is the correlation between the two things for you? How do you manage those two things?
Well, for me, it's literally as simple as these are all the things that I'm interested in, and so I'm just going to do it, kind of thing. And I think that, you know, a lot of my work in fashion, for example, in journalism, is actually fashion. Like I write a lot of fashion features for publications. One of my most recent pieces was for Refinery 29, looking into why 2016 was the year of celebrity merchandise and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, I think that these days everything is connected: fashion, music, even reality TV and politics. Look at Donald Trump. I think that's kind of the nature of the world that we live in today. Everything's really very connected. And, you know, even signing to Nev's models is an interesting extension of all of that, because I was signed as special bookings.
What does that mean?
Which is basically actors, like singers, digital influencers, as much as I don't really like that word, but all of that kind of stuff. So it's because of my journalism and because of my blog that I got signed as a model, you know. So I think, again, it all really is much more connected than it might appear on the outside, and I'm only just starting to figure out how much it really does all go together, I think.
You wrote an article for Refinery 29 entitled "How and Why Fashion Brands Are Catering More to Muslim Consumers." Could you talk a little bit about that article, please?
Well, that was basically just how Dolce & Gabbana recently released like a line of hijabs, and a lot of fashion brands are kind of thinking a lot more about Muslim consumers. And I think it would be silly essentially not to, considering how huge the Muslim demographic is and how much money they have and how, often they're really down to spend kind of thing. So yeah, it was kind of just looking into all of that. And H&M recently had their first veiled model, who's called Maria Idrisi. So it was, just kind of looking into all of that.
What are your thoughts on, I know this is a question that's been played out a lot, but I'm always interested to get people's opinions on it, on cultural appropriation, especially within fashion.
Cultural appropriation is in terms of like people stealing from each other, basically.
I know it's a tough one, and it's something that we've kind of gone around a lot with various different people. But I'm always curious to kind of see how different people.
It is a tough one. I know everyone's always like, oh, cornrows, they've been around for ages. Like, why is everyone now only thinking that they're a thing? And I completely understand the frustration. And recently, like at Coachella, everyone was like wearing bindies, and everyone was like, my God, why are they wearing bindies? You know what I mean? So I completely understand the frustration, but at the same time, I do think that it's kind of testament to a sort of multicultural world in which, of course we're going to take inspiration from each other because we're surrounded by each other all the time. And it's almost, it's almost a step away from kind of being like, oh, Black people have to sit at the back of the bus, like it's almost like, cool, let's all just be integrated. And again, I understand the frustration, and I think that all of these things kind of need to be done with respect and sort of giving credit where it is due and stuff. But I don't think it's fair to be like, oh, I shouldn't braid my hair because I'm not Black.
So I think the dominant argument is that there's a very thin line between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. And from it's something that I don't really like to talk a lot about, simply because it's been elucidated in so many different ways in so many different places. But it really is about respect. That's kind of what it boils down to. And if the culture that is being appropriated is not fairly represented within wider society, or people don't understand the origin or the history behind particular styles, and be that textiles or be it hairstyles, then obviously it's going to cause a lot of problems within that.
My friend actually sent me a screenshot yesterday. She had typed dreadlocks into Google, and it was all white people with dreadlocks that came back. So I think in cases like that, it's kind of like.
I think Justin Bieber's obviously when he came rolled his hair and he did that whole, it caused a lot of controversy around it. But ultimately, you need to think that if a white guy wears dreadlocks, his chances of getting a job aren't going to be hindered. Whereas if a Black guy does it, straight away there's a whole bag of stereotypes that come with a Black man with dreadlocks, and I think that's kind of what has to be addressed. But sure, we're talking English, and English is not my language, it's not your language either, so we can kind of argue that everything in a sense is borrowed from something else. But I think, where do you draw the line and say this is obviously very problematic? And things like language, which is actually a colonial thing, I think, for both of us, is different from a language that we choose to learn. I didn't choose to learn English.
I think, again, as long as there's sort of respect and understanding, then that's it, really.
Okay, another, not controversial, but another kind of, polemical question. What are your thoughts on the way in which the female body has been exploited, objectified, fetishized by the fashion industry?
Oof. Well, for starters, why is that not said about men? I don't think anyone would ever say to David Gandy, like, do you feel like your body's being exploited? I think it is a tricky one. I think that it's sort of a freedom of choice, really, at the end of the day. Like, I guess maybe some people find it liberating to be naked. I can't say that I would upload a photo of myself naked. Maybe one day, who knows, but not in the foreseeable. But I know that after Kim Kardashian and Emily, I can't say her last name, Ratajkowski, after that whole debacle last year, when they posted their naked photos and stuff, I know Emily said we are more than just our bodies, but that doesn't mean we have to be shamed for them or our sexuality. And I think that was really well said. Like, why should women kind of be singled out in terms of that. I think women are always kind of placed under different sort of expectations than men, and they're sort of, you know, people expect them to behave in a certain way, and, you know, being sexual or being any of those things is sort of a man's territory almost. And if a woman is too sexual, people are like, oh, she's a whore. Or if she's, you know, not sexual enough, they're like, oh,
she's a
da,
nun.
da. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, you can never get it right as a woman, I think, ever. And in terms of the fashion industry, to be honest, I think that there's probably more important kind of bigger issues, like, you know, size 0, you know, increased diversity. Like, I can't remember what was the percentage, something horrific. Like, I think it was like less than 20% basically of mainstream female magazines in 2016 had, or 15, sorry, had any woman of color on the cover. You know, that's much more of an issue, I think, than female bodies being exploited, because young girls, or, you know, people growing up, they don't have anyone to kind of identify with, or they don't have anyone to sort of look up to and be like, yeah, maybe I could do that, or maybe that could be me, you know. And I think that's almost more of a bigger issue.
Yeah, I just want to backtrack to the opening point that you made about why does nobody pull up David Gandy for wearing, you know, going for Marks and Spencer's in his boxer shorts, and I'm on the train at 8 o'clock in the morning and I see Gandy there in his pants.
Not that I mind.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things. But obviously, the socio-political position of men and women is very different. So, kind of, to try and compare men and women through the lens of objectification is quite a difficult thing to do, because obviously they don't hold equal status within the society, which is why that when a woman does certain things and you contrast that to a man, it's obviously completely different. That is because society is profoundly unequal.
Which needs to change.
Which has to change, right, exactly. So what I find interesting is how permissible it's now become through modelling, through platforms like Facebook and Instagram, for women to take their clothes off, and what is the symbolism behind that, or the connotations? Like you say, are women sacrificing themselves in the name of femininity? Or is feminism and liberation something far more profound than just not wearing a bra or taking, you know, showing some legs or whatever it might be?
Well, yeah, I personally, I think that feminism essentially is, you know, the right to choose. Do I, you know, to do whatever you want, basically, just how a man would be able to choose to do whatever he wants.
And by that rationale, this is where, you know, in my mind, I still haven't fully worked out what feminism is. It's something that I've read a lot. I've spoken to a lot of women, and I've heard a lot of different points of view. But I think the problem that I find is it's very fragmented within itself.
Yeah.
And so the right to choose is, again, something that will require some kind of examination, because if we are products of a society, that society has rendered us unwell or unable to choose rationally, we're going to make some pretty silly decisions. And that goes for men and for women.
Yeah. Well, I was having a conversation with my friend actually about this yesterday. She's getting married in a few months, and everyone was telling her, you know, the groom always gives a speech. Will you be giving a speech? And she was like, no. And they were like, oh, because you're a feminist, so we thought that you would give a speech, like literally like that. And she was like, I don't really see the connection here, basically. And she kind of got a bit annoyed about it, actually. And she was kind of just like, you know, I can do whatever I want. Like, what? Because I'm a feminist, I have to give a speech. Like, I don't understand. Like, why? You know? And I think that's the thing. And Polly Vernon, who's a columnist at Grazia, she wrote a book last year, I think, called Hot Feminist. And it was, you know, kind of touching on all of these things of, like, you know, why can women, fashion, I think, is often kind of considered a bit silly and frivolous, and, oh, if you like fashion, that probably means that you're a bit dumb or whatever, where, you know, obviously that's not the case. And it was kind of touching on all of that, and how, actually coming back to social media, how there's this cult of, like, feminism on Twitter and all of these things, and if anyone kind of doesn't fit into this little mold of feminism that this kind of Twitter mafia have kind of agreed that that's what it means, that they kind of get, people insult them and they get death threats and all sorts of crazy things. And that's contrary to that's not helping equality. Like, that's not helping the cause at all, and I think that feminism, again, just do what you want.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a very tricky one to kind of to navigate and to think about. What are your thoughts on having? I mean, one of the things that I've seen, particularly doing work in schools and with various young people, is when you ask a young girl who their role models are, who they aspire to be like, you'll always get Beyonce's and Kim Kardashians and people like that. Now, obviously, they're attractive women, they're very rich women, they're very powerful, they're very influential. I think what I'm interested in is when you ask that same question to a man or to a boy, the people, obviously they'll have footballers, they'll have musicians, but the choice is a lot wider. And there's something that men learn to value, the intellect, whereas women don't necessarily think about how smart another woman is. They're just more concerned with how pretty another woman is, and that is something to aspire to. What do you think has caused this?
I think it starts from when you're really young. I think, a lot of the time, and I think I read something about this recently, that a lot of parents will kind of, give their daughters, they'll be like, oh, you're so pretty, or, they'll kind of speak to them in a different way. They'll kind of give them different options than they would their son. Whereas if their son, if they fall, they'll kind of just leave them to kind of pick themselves up, or, look at them, or the daughter, they'll be like, oh my God, no. And they'll go and be super extra. And at school, I think as well, I remember at my school was horrific, but I remember one of the teachers was like, oh, well, you guys don't really need to bother, you can just go marry someone rich. And we were like, what? And those are your formative years. So if you're kind of told these things, and you're kind of those are the messages in the media around you, that's what people should aspire to, that people should aspire to just get married and pop out kids, and and you need to be good looking to keep your husband, and if you're not married by this age, and the kind of, I think the things that are focused on for girls are very, very different to the things that are focused on for boys.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I guess that is essentially probably what it is. I went to Egypt recently. I'm from Egypt originally, and I was there a few months ago. And I'm 27. I'm not old. Like I've still got quite a few years left in me, hopefully. And everyone was like, "Why aren't you married? Like, what's wrong?" And there was one man who I actually got really annoyed with him. And he was like, oh, don't you want your dad to be proud of you? And I was like, my dad is proud of me. I'm working really hard. I'm achieving, some quite cool things, I guess. Like I'm really trying, and I'm doing, relatively well for myself. Why should the only thing that should make him proud of me be if I had a ring on my finger?
Related to a man.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. I mean, I think culturally, you go around the world, and obviously you're always going to find that whole link there, particularly with women, oh, you must be married, or how many kids do you have? And it's like, no, I'm kind of working on my career, and I'm still relatively young in comparison. And so I think, that definitely, and what you say at the beginning as well, it definitely rings true. The idea that women are constantly told that they have to be pretty, they have to look pretty, they have to look good. I know a lot of the girls that I grew up with when we were young, their sole concern was just about appearance. And obviously guys too, to an extent, but it was more permissible to sit around and talk about politics and philosophy and things like this, whereas the girls were just concerned. And obviously as a young boy, you just become conditioned to think, oh, this is the only thing that occupies females' interest, or they lack intellectual curiosity. It's only when you get older and you meet women at university and places like that, you realise, wow, and that whole thing gets undone. And I think it's it's very important that more women are given platforms in places that are usually occupied and dominated by men. Not so much for the adult world to see, but more for young women to see.
100%. I think even in terms of, what it is for a man and a woman, that what they need to do to look good, I guess you could say. Women wax, and we put makeup on, and we get our hair done, and all men don't do anything. You guys just roll out of bed.
Yeah.
You're just
Or they go to
chilling,
the
you know?
gym and they do a whole load
Yeah.
of supplements that don't know what they're doing to their liver.
Yeah, fine.
And
Fair,
I hope for the best. Yeah,
yeah, I guess.
yeah.
But you know, and I remember up until a few years ago, I'm still not really a very makeup kind of person at all. And up until a few years ago, I pretty much never wore makeup. And I remember I got into a discussion with a friend of mine, and she was saying how it you don't look, you know, I don't think she was like you don't, but like in general, you don't look that as well put together, or like you bothered to really kind of take care of yourself if you're not wearing makeup. It just looks like you were running late, or you know, you just didn't kind of think it important. And that kind of resonated with me a bit. And she was saying how, you know, especially at work and stuff, if you're not kind of presentable, then you won't do as well, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's a shame that, you know, to be presentable, you need to be wearing makeup, and you need to be doing all of these things. And it is something as well that I think we need more kind of diversity to. And Alicia Keys is amazing that she's kind of going on a makeup-free life right now.
How do you think that's impacted people's perception of makeup, young girls and girls in general, like women in general? How do you think that's... has that done anything, seeing Alicia Keys wear no makeup?
Yeah, I'm sure it has. I think it kind of just gives you permission and knowledge that, you know, your natural beauty is enough. You know, she's going on the red carpet, she's performing live without makeup. And I remember when the whole no makeup selfie or whatever was a thing, and I was so annoyed. Like, that made me so angry, because I was like, why should it be an amazing thing that someone's not wearing makeup? Like, why should that be something worth, you know, hashtagging? Yeah, like, why is that such a big deal, you know? And it's really sad. Like, I have a lot of friends who will never leave their house without makeup, ever. And you know, you're that's not your face. Like, you're not seeing yourself how you really are. And I think that's quite sad. Like, you know, you're beautiful as you are, as cheesy as that sounds.
You're a lover of hip hop, from the things that I read, right? What are what's your take on how women are represented in hip hop?
I actually wrote an article about this as well, just saying how I was really sad. I was on a table, I'm not going to say any names, but I was on a table with like a bunch of really well-known rappers last year, because my friend worked with them or whatever. And the way they just looked at women, and the way they just... Because I was a woman, I automatically was invisible, or someone that they wanted to fuck, basically. Like, there was no middle. There was no, like, oh, hey, how, you know, interesting convo, nothing. Like, it was one or the other. And it really hurt. It really upset me, actually, because it just made me think, like, this is real life, you know, their lyrics are real. It's not made up. Like, that's really how they think. And
what was your article about? The
that,
piece that
basically,
you wrote? It was about that,
pretty much.
Right.
And the kind of heartbreak of, like, no.
I guess I spoke with the Last Poets for this series a few months ago, and we had a similar discussion. You know, like, it's not necessarily to do with the people per se; it's more the culture and the way in which these cultures create a very misogynistic and damaging regard of women in general. There's a lot of young girls that have kind of taken that same oppression and internalized it, and in a sense normalized. You know, this is expected behavior, and I think it filters through from hip hop to the porn industry to all different places in life. It will permeate, and you'll see the way in which young women have created a new idea or a new sense of what it means to be a woman. And this might sound quite dyspeptic, this might sound quite disparaging, but there's not a lot of positivity within those ideas, and I find that very, very worrying. As a man, obviously you're very limited to where you can go and what you can do, particularly in this subject. How do you kind of see what needs to be done in order to remedy and rectify a lot of these issues?
Well, I think, to be honest, we're already a bit on the way, to be honest. I think that, you know, there's an increasing number of women, you know, Lena Dunham, you know, and her girls, and, you know, there are an increasing number of women sort of in positions of being able to kind of express different sort of ways of being, and I think that's again social media and sort of the whole blogging and all of that has helped, because women are at the forefront of that. You know, women are really at the forefront of the blogging and Instagram and all of that, I think, and we're kind of giving a new meaning of what it is. And again, coming back to myself, you know, I'm, like you said, I'm a model, I'm a journalist, I did an undergrad in sociology and psychology, and that's something that I really sort of enjoy drawing into my writing, but I'm also really into fashion and really into music and really into all of those things, and kind of having multifaceted human beings, again, like we all are, like me, sort of writing about that and about that and about that, and posing and wearing that, and, you know, maybe uploading a picture of myself in a bikini when I'm on holiday.
Yeah.
Like, you can be all of those things, and we all are.
Yeah, I guess the key is not to be contradictory. I guess that's the. I don't think anyone's ever said you can't occupy those spaces. It's just when you're saying one thing from an intellectual sense, and then obviously from a superficial sense it becomes something completely different. I think that's what I find quite interesting with social media, is there are a lot of users, particularly on Instagram, who are massively reactionary, and they pander to a very particular kind of politics, a very particular kind of person. And there's a lot of anti-intellectualism. There's a lot of pseudo-intellectuals that I think on Instagram do more damage than good, because obviously it's a very small space, and what gets circulated can actually do a lot more damage to people's thinking than what it can good. I think that's something that we really have to look out for. The same idea can be said for health gurus. You know, like we spoke about health gurus earlier and how they create this false sense of reality. Like, people haven't got that amount of money. There's people on there that I've seen and they're on a yacht every other week. You know, like, what do you do for a living? Like, as far as you can see, it just looks like you just sit around on the ocean drinking champagne and posing with your tan.
Yeah, I think you are right, but at the same time, I think that this is brand new. It's brand new. Like, Instagram's, I think, launched in 2010. So that's only 7 years for us to kind of be figuring out what the hell is going on. And I think sort of increasingly people are sort of starting to figure out, yeah, it's not real. You know, this is a curated version of someone's life. And just how at school, you know, you have now they're teaching kids how to code, and we had IT lessons back in our day. I think, you know, social media is definitely something that schools kind of need to integrate into the curriculum, and sort of, and not just in terms of don't get FOMO, or, you know, this is
FOMO,
fear of missing out.
Oh wow. Cool, yeah.
Or, you know, don't compare yourself to someone else's life, but also in terms of, you know, online bullying, what oversharing is. Like, I got in trouble quite a few years ago for something really horrific that I tweeted, that it was a joke and it wasn't funny and it was really stupid, and I kind of assumed that people would understand that I was joking, because had I said that in a room with my 5 best friends, they would have all understood what I had meant. You know what I mean? But on Twitter or on the World Wide Web, most of the people who are following you don't know you, are not gonna give you the benefit of the doubt, don't give a shit what you really mean. You know what I mean? They take it at face value and they go with that. And I think that, you know, all of these things are things that kids need to sort of learn and be aware of. And I think as we kind of keep embarking on this social media life that we all live, we're gonna learn more and more how to deal with it, I think.
Before we conclude, there's 2 things I still want to touch on. The first one is the selfie. and you know, I mean, there's a lot that can be said. I mean, you can do a whole podcast series just on the selfie itself and what it means, what it indicates, what it represents. Because obviously this is as a one-off kind of thing. How do you see it? What does the selfie mean to you? Is it just a photograph of someone's face, or is there something a lot more going on?
I guess it's wanting to, I think we've always like portraits are selfies.
Absolutely.
You know, when people used to sit for like 6 hours and get painted, like that's a selfie. I used to take selfies on disposable cameras when I was 12. You know, and I
But
didn't
could we
post
argue
them
that
anywhere.
with a portrait, there's obviously two people involved. There's the artist, and then there's
Okay.
the sitter. Whereas
Interesting.
whereas with a selfie, we are the artist essentially. So
Yeah.
it's about control, and really the dynamic between portraiture. What I find really interesting is the power dynamic between the guy or the girl doing the painting and the person sitting down. Whereas with a selfie, we are completely in control of what we want to keep and what we want to show. This is what has led me to think that the levels of narcissism, and we've always been, human beings are by their very nature narcissistic and self-interested. That's kind of how we manage to survive and preserve ourselves. But at the same time, to create this very kind of myopic view of the world where everything revolves around just the face. I see boys and girls walking down the street just
Yeah.
taking selfies as they're walking. That's nuts, man.
Or like on traveling, like outside this amazing landmark, and you're just taking a picture of your own face.
Of your face, yeah.
What I found really interesting as well, actually, is that a lot of the time now, like I'll see someone taking a selfie, not of themselves, but like if it's them and someone else, and I'll be like, oh, do you want me to take the picture for you? And they'll be like, no, it's okay. Like people like
Control.
taking the
Yeah,
selfie, yeah.
It's about power. It really is, because once you give somebody else the camera, you are then in their pocket,
Yeah.
and they can do what they want with it. And I think a lot of people find that quite frightening. So it's just about, no, I'm cool. I'm going to take this photograph, and I'm the only one who's going to see the flaws
Yeah.
of what it looks like.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm not against selfies, to be honest. I do take them occasionally, but
Mm.
I think if you're just gonna be sitting there taking selfies of yourself all day, then you're missing out on
Yeah.
life.
but yeah, you're missing out on life. But also, is there a psychological issue? You know, if you are that dependent on, I mean, like we said earlier, like we know what your face looks like, and
Yeah.
for people to constantly have to keep putting their face on social media for that validation, for that approval, within itself engenders a very heightened sense of anxiety to want to keep looking at the phone and checking who's liked.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you can assume that if someone's, you know, constantly posting selfies of themselves, then they're you know, you can assume sort of seeking some form of validation. I read an article actually about a girl a few years ago who was addicted to taking selfies, and she said that she used to take, I can't remember, some shocking hundreds a day basically, and she used to just sit and, you know, edit them and you know, put makeup on just for the selfies and all of these sorts of things. And if she didn't get likes, like she would get so upset, and I think she weaned herself off the selfie, but
We'll go to rehab for selfies, yeah.
but it was, you know, it was definitely I guess a psychological issue that she in particular had.
I think they link it with OCD. It's a compulsion. It's the same kind of mechanisms and that same need to constantly do something. And I think that if it's looked at in that way, in the sense of this is an addiction, like this is not just fun, you know, we're just messing around with some filters here. This is something that has to happen, like in the same way as what an alcoholic or, you know, somebody who's on drugs needs that fix. People who are addicted to social media and to Instagram and Facebook, they constantly have to post. And I think that we undermine the dangers of these things, like you say, because it's still very new and we haven't worked out the long-term implications of these kind of things. What advice would you give to people who are like using social media to kind of carve out a similar thing to what you're doing or to what you do?
Be authentic, I think, you know, don't try too hard, because I think people can see through it, and it's not nice for anyone, to be honest. You know, be nice, be respectful. Don't be aware again that people are not your friends a lot of the time. They don't know you, they don't care about you really.
How about from the sense of a brand? Because I've noticed that you're very particular with what you post and how you post it, and you know the articles that you write as well. They're not just kind of like, it's not reactionary. You don't just write about any old thing. They're picked. You know, like I can tell that you've thought a lot about what it is that you're going to write, and they're very articulate and they're very well argued and very well judged. So,
Thanks.
how would you what advice would you give to young people who are aspiring to kind of occupy a similar position?
I guess it goes back to that quote I said on the personal branding of, you know, essentially what you put out is what people will come back to you for almost. So just, you know, just be aware basically that, again, yeah, basically what you put out there is what people are going to know of you. So for me, I know that, you know, a lot of my kind of expertise or my sort of interests lie in, you know, I'm Arab, so I do quite a few pieces on you know, that kind of thing. Like I wrote a piece on what sex is like, well, what it's like for people in Arab countries who are not married, like young people. How do you have sex? Like what do you do? You know, all of that kind of thing, because it's illegal.
Is that more to do with how okay, so it's illegal, so how it's perceived? Or
yeah, well, in a lot of Arab countries, sex before marriage is illegal, so but obviously not, you know, a lot of people do still have sex, so like how do you get around it? And you know, the kind of realities of that, like if you need to have an abortion, like all of that kind of thing. I wrote a piece on how a lot of domestic workers are treated really, really badly in a lot of Arab countries. So that's an aspect. And then fashion, hip hop, you know, those kind of things are things that I think, you know, are kind of, you know, I know a lot about or whatever, so that's something that I like to write about as well. So I think you kind of have to identify, and that takes time. I think as I've gone, like I started off pretty much only writing about music, and then as time went on, I realized like, no, I also like these things, and you know what I mean. And I think that you kind of carve out a sort of niche for yourself and you stick to it. Really, that's your brand.
Very good. Very good. So where can people find out about, after we've sat here cussing social media, where can they find out?
I have not cussed social media.
I have. Where can they find more of your work?
So I'm at Moorisla on Instagram, Facebook.
Not Mori Zilla. What did I say?
I don't remember.
Yeah,
Moorisla. So that's MOORIZZLA. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and my blog is moorisla.com.
Alya, thank you very much for talking to me.
Thank you.